Okay, peeps, it's been a little while since I've done one of these, but I want to get back into the swing and try to keep these little tutorials running. This one is going to be all about the appearance panel. I know some of you basically might just use it for strokes and fills and the odd additional effect. Some of you hardly look at this at all, and I think some of you are beginning to or have already learned a little bit about its power and have begun to leverage some of what this can do for you. I'm going to walk through a couple small examples that are hopefully just springboard your thoughts a little bit as to how this might be useful for you in anything from website interface building to just your general um, laying out of type and fills and objects. It's especially useful when you are adding effects to type that you might need to edit down the road, and the type has to be reset, and you might have in the past had to convert things to outlines to be able to get access to all of the different fill types and layer things up. And I want you to be able to realize how powerful the appearance panel is in being able to build up a whole bunch of different effects on top of each other. So here in our appearance panel, we will start looking at this first item. I'm just going to click on this text and I'm going to edit the text, and lo and behold, you see that the box around it automatically updates. So for buttons and interface elements on your website mockups, this can be super useful if you are needing to edit this down the road. If we want to change it to more info or click here, no problem. It'll auto update and keep the same padding around this text. And now we're going to just grab this object and start looking into how that's achieved. First of all, we have the characters, and if you look on the character level, you can this is probably one of the areas that can get confusing, is that the characters have a fill and a stroke assigned to them. If you start layering a lot of extra fills and strokes on top of this, sometimes the fill of the character level can kind of peek through underneath. So sometimes it's best, if you're going to be layering a lot, to turn the actual character level fills and strokes to nothing, and then go back up the level to the object, and then start adding a fill to this level. So let's add the fill to the type here. And this object can be added. You can add multiple fills on top of each other. This, you could add, another one that will override that fill. But now you see you have two fills, and you can kind of see that peeking through a little bit underneath. I don't know if I zoom in. It may not print if it were to print, but it looks a little glitchy on screen. So I would only use this if you're going to do, say, two different blends on top of each other, and you're going to set the screen mode of the top one to multiply or something like that. I can quickly show you an example here where we'll set a blend from left to right. Let's turn off the stroke, and then let's create another blend on top, and let's give it this blend. And let's say we edit this gradient to be from red to white. And let's make it the other direction. And let's set this one. You can go into the opacity mode and the blend mode on each individual stroke layer or fill layer and set that to multiply. Now you have one blend on top of another blend, and your mind can get blown just imagining the possibilities. And it's impossible to describe it all here in one moment. But if you are trying to achieve a certain effect, this becomes incredibly powerful when you start breaking it down to small, bite-sized, minute segments, and you add to it, and then you add another thing to it. Now I'm going to back out of this one again and say we'll get back to our text, and I'll turn this layer off because we don't need that. Now I'm going to show you what's happened for this stroke. This stroke started as a stroke like you would expect, adding a stroke to any type. And this stroke could be made see, the beauty of this too is if I'm doing it on the object level and not on the character level like I showed you down here, this can be dragged below the fill, so it'll just peek out behind and it won't actually move into the characters and start degrading the integrity of that character. You can also do that with a fill, generally by, like with a stroke. On an object, you can align the stroke to the inside of your path, to the outside, or centered on your path. But it doesn't seem to work with type. So this is the way to get that same object level control that you have with strokes on your type, and that's by applying a fill and a stroke on the object level, and then moving the stroke behind the fill. So if I make that bigger and thicker, it's not going to move into the stroke or into the characters at all and destroy their integrity. But that's a sort of side issue or side point. Now I'm going to show you that what I've done to that stroke, I've given it a transform and a rectangle. So I'm going to take this off and just reapply it so you see what I'm doing. Want to make sure now that if you want the effect that you're going to add to the stack to apply to the stroke only and not to the fill or anything else, that stroke is selected before you go down to the effect panel and choose what you're going to do. And what I'm going to do is choose the convert to shape. So it's going to take whatever stroke, or I mean I could have a circle object or anything, and I'm going to convert the shape to a rectangle. You can also convert to a rounded rectangle if you want rounded corners. Let's do that for now. Just well, I've done it down below, so we'll do that later. Let's choose the rectangle tool, and now I've got this panel that has the shape rectangle that I can choose. I can choose a rounded rectangle in here or an ellipse, and I will choose the rectangle, and it's giving me absolute sizes or relative sizes. I want relative because it's going to expand to fit the text. But if you want a very specific shape and size that is the same all the time, you could choose absolute. Here I'm going to just guess at what I want. Let's say I want 0.1 on the width and 0.1 on extra height. And you can make that anything you want, and you're previewing it and you say OK. Now the problem with that here is that type has different character X heights and just the basic character height of the bounding box that surrounds it. So you can see that it's added that dimension of width all the way around to the top and the right and left and bottom around the bounding box, but that's not quite centered for the type in the rectangle that it sits in. It's not optically centered. So what we're going to do is add an offset, and to do that we're going to add a transform. And there you just saw when I turned that on, it just bumped that down and centered it better in that space. So adding a transform is as easy as going to this panel again, make sure your stroke is selected, go here and say distort and transform, and we're going to use the transform tool. It's saying I already have this effect, so I would have to choose to apply it again if I wanted to double up transforms and add a new one on top of another one. So we'll just delete that, and I'll choose that stroke. Always make sure that stroke is selected, otherwise you'll apply it to the wrong thing. And for some reason it's a little glitchy. If you apply the transform to another fill or stroke and then drag it, you're supposed to be able to drag and drop it. I have found that glitchy. If I grab it from another stroke and then drag it to a different element in the appearance panel and just try to drop it in a new location, it doesn't always take. So let's add this. That's just a little caveat so you look for it. Let's add this little offset in here, and we'll just move it up. I can type any um, measurement unit in here that I want. So if I want to say, let's type 3 pixels and then preview and see how much that's moved it, and I might just tweak it to 2 pixels, and it looks a little better. I might say okay, and then check it out, say, well, maybe it's not quite right. Let's go 1 pixel, and it's somewhere in between there. It's a little bit of a, just optical guess, and you'll eventually get it right. The nice thing is that once you have it, you just can replicate it and change all your navigation, for instance, on the top if it's for a web page. Beautiful. Let's go down to the next one. This one's just using a rounded rectangle. And you'll see here the same thing. I can take that off. And I have a fill for that one, and I've transformed the shape. If I take that off, you've got just the type. Now I'm going to give another example over here of a potentially useful application for the appearance panel. Let's say we have this kind of general leaf shape. I can add, that's my fill. I'm going to add another fill over top, and with this fill I've chosen the scribble effect, which is just under here, and stylize and scribble, and you can adjust all those settings in there. There's all these settings and adjustments for a scribble effect to add to that. And then I could add another stroke. And that stroke, maybe I want it to be a loose and playful stroke that isn't quite aligned, directly on top of, I don't know, make it something different so it stands out. Yeah, so maybe it's like this, and it's the same as the interior stroke. And it's not quite lined up with the fill object behind it, and it's a little loose and playful and wobbly. Well, I've basically added a roughen effect to that stroke, and then I've offset it with a transform effect. And when you start layering all these up, you can get some very interesting looks. Now I've also added a transform to this whole object, and you do that just by choosing on this top level object, hit transform in the effects panel, again down here to transform, and when I turn this on, you'll see what I've got. I've got a star shape because I've gone in here and transform, and I've rotated it 45 degrees, and I've chosen my access point to be the lower left corner, and I have this kind of set at a 45-degree angle. It's pointing up and to the right 45, and so that lower left corner is basically my rotation point that can rotate around, and at 45 degrees and 7 copies of it, you can set this to 5 copies and turn on preview, and you'll see how many you need to complete it. And this could be trial and error, and you just figure that out. And I've added 7 copies and rotating 45 degrees at each iteration. So that's that. This down here, now say you want maybe that center point to rotate a little further out here. Let me turn off the transform. It's like maybe I want my access point to be further out. How do I get it to rotate around this automatically and update every time I edit a part of this petal? Well, I do that by just making a point in space. Let's say I click here and I make this point, just one point. Convert my tool, and then I group these together. So I've got a point here. If you look at my wireframe mode, you'll see my point and my leaf petal shape, and I've grouped them together, and then I would add a distort and transform to the whole group, and you start seeing how powerful this is. And now I'll make my axis point the lower left again, But now it's been offset because I've added a point to the group that is making the lower left extremity further out. And I am now going to do 45 degrees, let's say, and I'm going to make 7 copies of that. Well, I have too many, maybe. I don't think I need that many. Let's say I want 30 degrees. Actually, what I should do is just say I want 6 copies. You can do math in these number dialog boxes too. So type in 360 divided by 5 and then hit enter, and you've got, wow, I shouldn't have hit enter because it gets out of the box. And you got 72 degrees, and then I put in here 5 copies because it was dividing by 5, and I'm not going to get overlapping redundant shapes. So I've got exactly 5. I want 360 divided by 6. Now I've got 6, and let's put in 6, and we're good to go. So that is that in that. Well, I had one more thing here. Let's just go one farther. I'm going to show just kind of like an interface element or a divider. If you're building a website and you're putting a divider between elements, let's go out a little ways. You have kind of the highlight side and a shadow side of a very discrete little vertical line separating objects. If I zoom in real close, you'll see it's just a simply 2 strokes applied to an object. If I make a copy of this, you'll see it's just a simple stroke. I'll just choose one side of this and move it along, and you'll see what it's doing. So I've got no fill, I've got 1 stroke that's 1 point wide, and that stroke has a gradient applied to it. No, it's regular. This stroke is a gradient. So I have a gradient you see over here that goes from a darker green to the same green as the background. So it's kind of got a shadow side inside there. And then I've got a second one that has the same green color, but I've got an 87% screen of that, or tint of that. And I've offset that with my transform. Again, I just pushed it up a pixel. And now I can change this. If it's a box shape, I can change it to any width, and it'll update without having to rebuild all these offset little objects. Now, the beauty of all of this too is you can save all these, and you could make a bunch of commonly used ones in a graphic library. So I take this and I basically apply it here, and I can reuse it in my graphic styles in the future. If you make a bunch of favorites you know you're just going to use quite often, then why not make a style library and just stick this in your whole library folder in your Illustrator user settings, and anytime you go and look in here under graphic style library, it'll show up in this list if it's in the appropriate user library for Illustrator. That's a separate topic. We can help you find where to find that, or where to look for that if you want to make a library that you use a lot. So when I zoom in really close, this starts to break down and not look as elegant, but you back up a little bit and that looks really nice, like a shadow and highlight side of a small bevel. Okay guys, I think that's going to cover it for now. There's so much more we could do with this effect, but I hope that gets you at least digging in and trying to understand for yourselves how you could make good use of this. Again, I've seen some text effects used for some of our ads that were just multiple shapes, multiple copies of a text object with gradients and outlines offset and layered on top of each other, that if you have to edit that text and you have to rebuild the effect all over again and start from scratch making copies of those objects because the text is changed. And this way, if you built it through here, it would be simple and easy for the next person to come along and just edit the text, and everything updates easily and quickly. So I hope this one's really useful for you guys, and we'll be in touch soon.